This is TWiT.
This made me really mad. Congress had hearings in Boulder, Colorado. That's not what made me mad, by the way.
Boulder's a great place.
DHH?
I live there.
I love DHH.
Yes.
DHH and the Tile, more than DHH, the CEO of Tile, who said Apple acted anti-competitively by putting Find My iPhone in the iPhone. Tile makes a Bluetooth tracker.
It's really big. You can't stick a Tile to your iPhone and then expect to use it.
And I don't know if I agree with her contention that by I think there is merit in the overall complaint that Apple can do stuff with iPhone apps that other companies can't do, right?
Yes.
So Tile does
Private
not have
APIs.
all of the location features that Apple's iPhone could allow. Apple has, monopoly in that respect. Yeah. She was there testifying in front of Congress. So were a few other CEOs, including, and then we're just testifying about Apple. The guys who do, this is probably why they were in Boulder. You know those pop sockets that go on the back of your phone? That's from Boulder. I know that because my son
went to... And there's now a docket for the pop socket, and you can rock it.
You can dock the rocket of the pocket of the socket. This is a very Danny Kaye moment. The pop socket guy said, we have to sell through Amazon. We tried not selling through Amazon. It cost us $10 million. But Amazon basically, stole our design and started making their own. I guess that's what he was saying.
I think he just said it was hard. I don't think he even said it.
He didn't say that.
Yeah, I think he says that there was
they didn't like working with
restrictions or
Amazon.
regulations on selling. Yeah.
This whole thing, and then David Hannemeyer Hansen, who is the founder of Basecamp, and I've talked to many times. He invented Ruby on Rails. He's kind of legendary in our business, despite his propensity for buying very, very expensive automobiles. But what could possibly be wrong with that?
Being a bit of a Twitter drama magnet.
He's a drama magnet. He's the guy who said, my wife got a different credit limit on the Apple card.
Outrage should never presage investigation. The investigation should always come first.
Yeah, well, that's what Twitter's. We're in this world now where Twitter and the outrage engine, precedes everything. In any event, he said that these companies. What did he say? He had a great line, and I can't read it because I can't scroll.
You're our only hope. Help us.
Help us.
Yeah.
Help us, Congress. You're our only
What
hope.
was he complaining about with Ruby on Rails?
He said the digital ecosystem had been, quote, colonized by a handful of big tech companies. Help us, Congress. You're our only hope.
Oh,
He
man.
doesn't like the App Store.
That's not a great way to leave. That's not customary for a tech company to say, please, Congress, legislate and interfere with our business, because that's not that great.
It's a long-standing tradition. If you go to the EU, for instance, a lot of the EU's regulations and privacy things, that whole, what Jeff Jarvis calls the Leistungsrecht, the whole snippet thing, came because publishers, magazine and newspaper publishers, went to the courts in EU and said, these guys, this Google, they're really making it hard for us. And so I think this is not unusual for companies that can't compete in the marketplace to go to legislators and say, fix it.
Uneducated legislators by large part.
Yeah.
We sold a green screen plugin called dbmat for a long time.
Yes.
And we made a lot of money on it. I mean, it was a solid $30,000 a month that comes in on a 128K unprotected plugin. Like there was no password, there was no nothing. It just installed, and it just kind of came in, and everybody knew that as soon as Apple fixes the green screen, because their green screen plugin in Final Cut was so bad that the reason that everyone was buying ours is because it was the only way to make it work. That the meal train would be over.
You'd be Sherlocked eventually.
I knew I was going to be Sherlocked eventually. Like it was like not a, it was like that was coming, and I wasn't. So when Apple came out with Final Cut 10 and they had a great green screen plugin in there, I was like, well, we're done there. We're going to move on to something else. Now, and the thing is that
if they had done it 2 weeks after you came out with DVMat, maybe.
That was bad timing. That would have been bad timing.
Yeah.
The thing is that they're not, and the thing is that you could see that it was there. And definitely when you're working with any of these big companies, I mean, I've worked with a lot of the big companies. You know that they could squash you in a second.
Yeah.
And you have
I
to
would
be
love to go to
conscious of
Congress and say, there's way too many podcasts. You've just got to limit the number of shows available.
But the other thing, though, is that it is these companies have made it easier to sell than it ever has been. Like when we look at this, I mean, the idea
they do have a monopsony in the Apple Store, though, right?
But it's less.
And
than
that's
50%.
by the way, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. That is
okay. The Apple Store, though, that's their store. Like they have a monopoly on their
only store
for far less than half of the world's population, and definitely less than half of the U.S.
But it's also there's also an argument.
Go to Android.
There's also an argument to be made that Apple has proprietary access to private APIs that give them the ability to compete in a way that no third-party developer can. But that goes right back to our previous argument, because would you trust any random person with access to the APIs that cover location and security? Yeah, so you have to have some sort of, like, in my perfect world, there would be a vetting system where certain other trusted companies will do it. It's an incredibly gray and fuzzy line to try to walk, but I do think that there will, not only does there have to be, but there will eventually be regulated to be some sort of bigger system than we have right now at the App Store.
But I really thought that part of the conversation, if we're talking about Apple, that they would be talking about borderline abuse that Apple wreaks upon developers through controlling all of their apps through required APIs. Like if you if Apple suddenly decides that a new cloud service is absolutely critical to the future of the company, and the future of the future of this cloud service will be boosted by forcing every single developer to support it, whether that API is finished, usable, or sensible for the product that the developer is making, they can inflict that demand, that change upon the developer. The number of stories that you get from developers saying that we had all these plans for 2019 to spend most of the money and time that we spend enhancing our product to finally bringing this wonderful feature that all of our users have been demanding. Unfortunately, we had to spend that time instead supporting an API that we don't use, that makes no sense to us, that Apple is so new that Apple hasn't really documented, but Apple will not allow our app to be updated in the App Store unless it supports this new API. So Apple has a lot to answer for, but not being able to track a tile tracker through the Find My app probably, to me, is not one of them.
Well, and I just want to say, like, as someone who has sold a lot of software, I just have to say that in the old days, I have to now figure out how I'm going to distribute that, how am I going to secure it, how am I going to do the e-commerce for it, how am I going to do the promotion for it, how am I going to do all these things that the App Store took away and made it simpler. I wouldn't even consider doing it on my own anymore. I mean, I would absolutely if I develop software again, I would absolutely put it on the App Store, and I wouldn't complain, and I just move on, because it has never been better than what it is now. I mean, as someone who went through the trouble of doing it and all the stuff that I had to do, of being able to distribute updates and know that everybody's going to get. I mean, the idea that you could distribute updates and that everybody actually knows that there's an update, and it's super simple for them to update and do their thing is amazing. It is amazing. As someone who did this, I mean, like, we'd update and, 10% of the people would even know it was there and it was free, and then they'd come back and complain and they were talking, oh, this doesn't work. I'm like, that's like 3 versions ago, And so the idea that you can keep everybody up to date on it, that you can move those things down, it's not perfect. It's definitely not better, but holy smokes, is it better than it used to be?
Well, okay.
I mean, it was so painful. Like,
so,
I'm sorry.
There's 2 things. There's the APIs, and by the way, that's historically been a problem. For years, Microsoft was accused of having secret APIs in Windows. Right. There were even books written about it.
For Internet Explorer.
They did, and any company that found them and used them was sadly upset when they got deprecated, but that's the price you pay.
Although, to their credit, and credit is the wrong word, I mean, Cydia and other jailbroken app stores existed for years, and they only stopped when they became not economically viable. Apple never executed evil, sinister plans to destroy all the jailbroken app stores.
They just kind of, every time there's a jailbreak, they turned it off.
But they could have done a lot of things to make their lives really miserable. Okay. They never went out. They never put DMCA takedowns on. As far as I know, they never personally sued Sarek, for example.
I think that, Apple is a little bit of speaking of nanny states, a little bit of a nanny in what it allows in the App Store. It doesn't allow some political comment in the App Store. It doesn't allow adult content in the App Store. Yeah. And so it is a monopoly. It's actually technically a monopsony, and that's what the Supreme Court's going to be ruling on. A monopoly is if you're dominant in sales. A monopsony is if you're dominant in buying. And
it's also like one of the
if
things
you
I think the
interpret
internet,
Apple as a buyer of apps that it then resells to, which is kind of a stretch. But
like
that's
an aggregator.
An aggregator.
But they,
one of
they
the
don't
things
actually say that though. They straight up say we're not the owners of these apps. All we are is like a store where people shelve their apps.
Of course, that's what they say, but that's what the Supreme Court's going to rule on because, in effect, they are because they're the only place you can buy apps. You have to. So it's as if you went to a fruit store, if you will, and the only place you could buy apples was from that particular fruit store. They would be,
or if Walmart said that they were all independent contractors, everyone on the shelf.
Yeah.
But the hard part, like the thing for me that in general, the internet is really bad at multiple truths, and it is possible that when the App Store launched, they were like, I remember that with Palm Info Center, and I was paying a fortune and getting terrible support, and it was the app market for mobile was terrible, and for developers they were being charged way more than 30%, 55%, 70%, more than that. And it's possible that the App Store was an incredibly good model in order to get the modern app economy, the pop app economy, actually going for people to trust software again on mobile devices and to get buy-in from all the developers and the millions and millions of customers that followed.
That's called
platform.
Possible, that's a platform.
Yeah, but it's also possible that over the last 10 years, we and the market and the customer base has matured to a point where the App Store model and the agency model are no longer the one-size-fits-all solutions that really helped get them going in the beginning, and we have to evolve them to a more shared and flexible model.
If I were going to write an amicus brief for Apple, I would say when you go to the Supreme Court, you point out that progressive web apps, PWAs, can be written and in no way limited by Apple. And so anybody can write an app that's downloaded from the web directly onto an iPhone. And what Apple should do is make sure that there's first-class support for progressive web apps. And then it's over because you don't have a monopoly anymore.
That's what they said to Playboy, remember? They said, you guys can make a web app, and they did.
A web app. And honestly, that's a reasonable argument. As long as web apps can be as good as native apps from the App Store, you're done. And if somebody wants adult content, they do that. I mean, I guess they kind of argue that, well, that's what the browser's for, But make PWAs a first-class citizen on the iPhone, and I don't think you have a case.
And I think with WebGL, and I'm guessing, pure guess, that Apple is going to have WebMetal ready fairly soon. Once all that stuff is in place, those are going to be much more performant than they are today.
Yeah. And then just like on the Macintosh, because that's what happens on the Macintosh. You have an app store, but if you're a developer like Rich Siegel and you say, well, my BB Edit needs to do more, you don't have to sell it on the App Store. And if you could do that on the iPhone, it's over. Then you say, well, look, if you want safe, secure apps that we vet, get them from the App Store. But if you're willing to take a chance, download your apps from a website. As a progressive web app, I think that's a great compromise. Our TWiT forums, the TWiT community, is in a program called Discourse that actually does a very nice PWA version. And if you compare it to the App Store version, I prefer the PWA.
It's way better.
Yeah, it's
way better.
So as long as Apple doesn't start pulling back, and now they won't because of this, pull back on Safari's PWA capabilities, I think
it makes sense.
That's a great solution. It has to be app-like. But, I think that Twitter's PWA is a very good app on the experience on the iPhone.
And then fix Daniel Jalkut's APIs, and everyone will be happy again.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. And you talk to developers, and you understand there is reasonable friction from developers about the App Store. There's things they're not happy with.
Well, it's the lack of consistency. It's like Jalkut, like that app was approved every day for 10 years, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we'd realize that this is not really like the API you should be using. And he's like, I filed this radar 8 times, guys, seriously.
Yeah.
Right.